And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, February 19th, 2021, and it's a frigid country that we're bringing us to. And we've been praying for everybody who's suffering through all this cold this week that we've been going through. We got a busy program, as always. We're going to talk about the economy going in the wrong direction. That's right, the economy is going in the wrong direction. We're going to pick up on something we began preaching about just a couple years ago, roaring seas, and ask the question, is this a new round of more waves coming in regards to the scripture that God talks about in the book of Luke? Then we're going to go to the seasons. We're going to do part 2 of pagan holidays or God's holy days. So we're going to talk about how Satan's deception has absolutely wrapped itself around God's plan and then created a counterfeit. We'll talk about that today. But let's get into a couple of short stories first. Eric Swalwell, God is a woman. You know, God says he's going to give us reprobate minds, and it seems like it's coming to pass really, really fast right now. Eric Swalwell implies that God is female at Trump's impeachment trial, that Internet mocks him for misgendering God. Can't make that up. That's what it is. God's a woman. Swalwell was speaking on the Democrats' decision not to subpoena witnesses, saying that the Republicans have acquitted Trump even if God herself had been called. Unbelievable. You know, the nation's going to pay a price for all this. It's absolutely phenomenal. God said he'd send them a delusion, and they're going to believe a lie. Well, you're seeing it at all walks of life right now going across the nation. Look what God says in Romans. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. That's God saying that they're fools. God tells us don't call no man any fool, but God says himself. He does that. That's his interpretation of what goes on with mankind. And where else do you see people in so profound belief that they are so wise and powerful in this nation, except in Washington, D.C.? It goes on in verse 28, same chapter. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind. And you're seeing it. Isaiah says they would be sick from their head to the toe. We shouldn't be surprised. We should be ready to understand what's going on and be prepared, because it's going to be using this kind of knowledge to destroy those who do obey God, God's people. Now, let's move to this one. This one, I actually almost put this in, you can't make this up. The Biden administration, believe it or not, has approved the Taliban pipeline. A pipeline, you say. That's right. The Biden kills the pipeline at home, but promotes them for the Taliban. So all this global climate change and concern about the environment in the world, well, it's just for us. They can use it over there in the Middle East. The U.S. government, Biden administration, has apparently brokered a meeting between the Turkmenistan government of the Taliban for the Trans-Afghanistan pipeline to bring the Turkmen gas across Afghanistan and Pakistan to India. So they're going to begin to bring it across. But look who they went with when they brokered this deal. The Taliban. It was the same deal that now Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad sought to make with the Taliban in the years before September 11th when he was the consultant for Unicol Corporation. So now he's back in power. 9/11's gone out the way. The Taliban, who is an absolute terrorist agency against the United States, being brokered by the United States to bring gas over. So what does this mean? It means it brings out millions and millions of dollars to a terrorist organization that will continue now to rise up again, just like they did before 9/11. Put aside the environmental arguments and consider Freedom House latest. Freedom in the World reports that Turkmenistan is among the world's worst offenders in regarding human rights. They're one of the worst offenders, even below, unbelievable but true, North Korea in terms of freedom and civil liberties. So now we're going to broker a deal to put them back in power with the finances that they were that was reserved from them for the last 4 years. This is amazing how fast, and I just can't imagine. you can't cover enough information and how fast they're returning back to what was making this nation deteriorate before the last administration. Unbelievable how fast this is going. Well, that one didn't make it to the you can't make this up, but this one did. How about this? Secession from the United States. Will we have a new civil war? Now, we're actually covering this, that there's going to be a civil war. It's a spiritual civil war that God warned us about all the way back in the book of Genesis. But here we have an actual physical state saying that they make their own nation. Texas secession from the U.S., the next civil war. Texas Republicans endorsed legislation to allow vote on secession from the U.S. State's Part Chairman Allen West is the latest Republican to come out in support of declaring Texas an independent nation. It's going to be interesting to see how this comes out. There's approximately 16 states that are considering the same thing right now because of what's going on in America. In an update, Allen West, the chairman of the Texas GOP, says Texans should be given an opportunity to vote to secede from the United States. Well, we'll see how that plays out. It didn't go too well back in the Civil War days in the 1800s, but we'll see how this goes out today. But sometimes you feel like that yourself, like you just need to go somewhere. Well, there's nowhere to go, and this world is going to go downhill pretty quick. But anyway, I wanted to bring that out. All right, this is important because many people across the nation, literally millions of people, are freezing across the nation. Winter cold across much of the country. The Texas electric grid, now be ready for this, the Texas electric grid operator says frozen wind turbines are hampering the state's output for energy. That's right. The more you push for the green, wind turbines and whatever else they do, the worse the nation gets when disaster comes. Over 4.5 million people in Texas have been without power from the storm's frigid temperatures. Now, we're taping this week on Wednesday because we couldn't get in yesterday because even here in New Orleans, we were below freezing. In fact, 25. I was out of power myself for 5 to 7 hours yesterday. And we finally get back above the freezing mark. But you have these kind of temperatures in New Orleans, you just shut this country down, this nation, city down. In fact, it did. Shut Mardi Gras down, along with Latoya, who shut down Mardi Gras. By the way, Mardi Gras, it was their coldest Mardi Gras since 1899, 122 years ago. Set a new record. Set a brand new record yesterday for the coldest Mardi Gras. But anyway, that wasn't what stopped Mardi Gras. That had been out there anyway. But the government said you can't Mardi Gras this year because of COVID. Keep everybody safe. Anyway, over in Texas, they're suffering. Even as this morning, there's over 2.5 million people without power. Some of those people are going to be frozen to death. Additionally, the solar panels that covered the snow aren't working either. Now, they estimate of the wind turbines, approximately 50% of the turbines were shut down, either being frozen or out of balance because of the snow. But anyway, almost 25% of the energy in Texas comes from this solar panels and wind turbines. Not as much from the solar panels, but take a look at that picture. Pull that picture back up again, Jeff, so I can see that. Look at all the ice on top of them solar panels. Well, you're not getting any energy from them when this happens. So they're hurting. So in an extreme situation where everybody's using maximum capacity and you lose 25% of your power, you got big problems. And that's what they're facing in Texas. But the issue is they're trying to do this around the country. Just like in Texas. Just like in Texas. Now, I think I had a video here. I wanted to back that up just a second. Yeah, I do. So I want to play this video here. It's about 4 minutes long from Tucker talking about the green energy and some of the problems the United States is moving into. Let's play that video.
Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Happy Monday. Well, the Green New Deal has come, believe it or not, to the state of Texas. And we're here with the report. How's it working out so far? Well, the good news is all that alternative energy seems to have had a remarkable effect on the climate, as intended. Last night, parts of Texas got to temperatures that we see in Alaska. In fact, they were the same as they were in Alaska. So global warming is no longer a pressing concern in Houston. We've solved that problem. The bad news is they don't have electricity. The windmills froze, so the power grid failed. Millions of Texans woke up to boil their water because with no electricity, it couldn't be purified. The ironically named Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which oversees the grid, had no solution to any of this. They simply told people to stop using so much power to keep warm. So in Houston, hundreds of shivering Texans headed to the Civic Center like refugees to keep from freezing to death. Some people in Texas almost certainly did freeze to death today. That's what happens when it gets that cold. Later this week, we'll learn just how many more as they tried to keep warm with jury-rigged heaters and barbecues and car exhaust. That happens every time. When the power goes out, even advanced societies become primitive and dangerous. People die. We've seen it happen repeatedly in California for years now. Rolling blackouts in a purportedly first world state that is slipping steadily into chaos. But in Texas? Who saw that coming? And not just because Texas is mostly Republican. If there's one thing you would think Texas would be able to do, it's keep the lights on. Most electricity comes from natural gas, and Texas produces more of that than any place on the continent. There are huge natural gas deposits all over Texas. Texas is an oil and gas state, famously. Running out of energy in Texas is like starving to death at the grocery store. You can only do it on purpose. And Texas did. Rather than celebrate and benefit from their state's vast natural resources, politicians took the fashionable route and became recklessly reliant on so-called alternative energy, meaning windmills. 15 years ago, there were virtually no wind farms in Texas. Last year, roughly a quarter of all electricity generated in the state came from wind. Local politicians were pleased by this. They bragged about it like there was something virtuous about destroying the landscape and degrading the power grid. Just last week, Governor Greg Abbott proudly accepted something called the Wind Leadership Award, given with gratitude by a company getting rich from green energy. So it was all working great until the day it got cold outside. The windmills failed, like the silly fashion accessories they are, and people in Texas died. A lot more of them than died at the Capitol on January 6th, by the way, just for reference. Now, we're telling you all of this not to beat up on the state of Texas. It's a great state, actually. But to give you some sense about what's about to happen to you, to every state. And we're not speculating on that. Here's the new president explaining his plan.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer. That's why I'm signing today an executive order to supercharge our administration's ambitious plan to confront the existential threat of climate change. It is an existential threat.
Just reading the script. Climate crisis, existential threat, ambitious plan. You hear those phrases a lot, and you'll notice that they are all suspiciously non-precise. So what do they mean for you? Well, they mean higher energy prices for starters. Gas is already up, in case you haven't noticed. Electricity will follow. Higher costs hurt the weakest. Inflation always does. But it's worse than that. Green energy inevitably means blackouts. And someday that may change as technology progresses. But as of right now and the current state of technology, that is true. Green energy means a less reliable power grid, period. It means failures like the ones we're seeing now in Texas. That's not a talking point. It's not a political slogan. Say it. Again, that is true. It's science. So, of course, they're denying it.
In fact, New York, they interviewed the energy person in New York who's in charge of all this, and he talked about them up in their part of the country, said there's no way that New York can go green. One of the lead nations, cities and states in the country. They can't go green. So we don't have the space and we don't have the ability to be able to do that in the state of New York. So I don't know what they're going to try to get accomplished. But now they're going to begin adding, what they're trying to add, carbon tax. So if you don't go green, you're going to pay more for what you're already using. So let's talk about that as our lead in for this. The economy is going in the wrong direction. So what are we looking at here? Is we're looking at the results, and we've been covering this, is how fast the nation is changing in this new executive order country that we live in, rather than the government actually legislating laws. We now run by executive orders. So this is destroying the nation with the stroke of a pen, week 3. So what are we going to cover today? How about this? Usurping Congress. Here we go. $15 minimum wage would boost to pay millions, but would cost 1.4 million jobs. So that's what you're looking at as the beginning goes out. The new government reports offers fresh ammunition for both sides of the debate, raising the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour, which is going to be done, I believe, if they get it across the way they want to, over the next 3 years, that eventually everybody would get up to $15 an hour. The report released by the Congressional Budget Office concluded that by boosting the minimum wage, it would raise income for millions of Americans and lift 900,000 out of poverty. Well, that's true, but the consequences are, if you're one of the 1.4 million people who lose your job, that's not going to be much of a help. Anyway, that's what they're looking at as one of the concerns for the nation. All right, this is from the Rasmussen, a poll talking about the confidence in the economy. When the confidence dies, what you need to understand here, the economy moves upon the confidence of the people who live in it. Is that if I believe I'm going to do well, then I'll go ahead and spend some money to do things now because I believe I'm going to be okay as things go forward. But once that confidence level drops, once you feel like there's fear out there, I'm not going to have a job, things are not going to get better, you tend to hold back and you reserve your funds. You don't buy, you don't borrow, you don't lend. You hold on to what you have for security. And so it's a self-professing problem, is that when you don't believe it's going to happen, it won't happen. And that's what's going on in the United States right now. Take a look at this poll. Americans are pessimistic about the Biden economy. This is not Republican and this is not Democrat. This was simply a poll from Rasmussen, a national telephone and an online survey that 41% of the American adults says the U.S. economy will be weaker a year from now. Not might, but will. Now, when you get this at home and you're watching this, just pause this section for a little while and take a look at this. In that, what that shows you is all the different areas of negative hope for America. Some of them expect to be deteriorating as much as 23% to the negative by next year. So there's not a lot of hope for what's going on right now. I don't care how much you listen to CNN and the left side of the news, the reality of what's going on is going to be affecting the Americans, because we're covering this right now, is that we have at the stroke of a pen, at the turn of a dial, at the change of a day, the New Guards has literally gone out of its way to stop the economy, whether people realize it or not. Now, you know, we've been talking about, and I've been talking about the economy like this since 2007 and 2008, when God blessed us to be able to warn this nation that there was an economic collapse that was going to happen back then. We understood what was going on. And I'm telling you again right now, it's not going to be today or tomorrow, but very soon, probably this administration, you will begin to see this nation begin a new collapse. It is going to make 2008 and 1929 look like child's play, because God warned that is what's going to happen. When you look at this, the stock market, with all this negative news going on, the stock market just continues to soar. Just like in 1929, they'd believe there'd be no end, that this was going to be going on forever. The President of the United States back in 1929 said, "We have licked poverty." Just 6 months later, the United States was swimming in it. We're going to go that way again, and people need to understand that. Don't let your guards down. I don't know what stations you listen to, but this is the facts of what's going on. It doesn't matter what station you listen to. It could be the left, it could be the right. There's not a lot of conservative stations out there. You need to follow the money. Everyone's going to put a spin on what they want to accomplish in their network. The bottom line is God's in charge. So you need to follow the money of what's going to go on. So now take a look at this. The Gallup poll said that the percentages of the U.S. adults who say they are now financially better off than they were a year ago has tumbled 24 points to 35%. Now only 35%. 6 months ago, it was 68% said they were better off. So it's beginning to deteriorate. That is the lowest reading since 2014, 7 years ago. 36% say they are worse off. So we're in pretty bad shape. Now, on top of that, you got COVID. And you got all these agencies shutting down the rest of the country. You got the fights between the school board not wanting to send the kids to school, even though they said they're following science, but only when it works to their benefit. So this nation's in a mess. In fact, the whole world's in a mess, and it's not going to get any better. A year ago, at the height of the Trump economy, Americans would look back and most believe they never had it so good. And we reported on that as it was going. Now, after a year of the Red Chinese attack on our economy and a job-killing administration, the economic confidence has crashed with only 35% of the Americans optimistic about their future, and small business optimism at its lowest level since November 2013. That goes back even another year. So what we're looking at is things are not going to get better. When you see this, spending halts, as I said earlier, lending halts, people begin to secure what they have before they move on. Excuse me. Oil prices rising ever since the election. This is alarming. Let me show you this chart and how fast things are rising. You think you're paying higher prices for gas now? You haven't seen the beginning of it yet. Look at this. This can go much higher, so I'm leading into this. Now, I'm going to put a line here. All right, this is November 6, 2020. What happened November 6? The election. All right, that's the election. Look at the price for a barrel of oil. $37.45 for a barrel of oil. Now, we come to today. Now, this chart, when I pull this chart out, it shows you up to February 21st, but now we're in March. So let's bring the chart now. So look where we are today. All right? No, we're not in March. We will be in March. February 17th, $60.12. Can you see that? From $37 to $60 in 3 months, it's up 60.5% oil. Can you believe that? A lot of it has to do with going green and stopping the pipeline. That means we're going to have less oil. So what that means is that the price of oil that you're paying for is going to go up. Now, Canada, who sends all the oil, sending it through the pipeline, they're still going to produce it. They're not going to wreck their nation like we are. They're simply going to sell it to the truckers who now have to truck it in, or to other nations who are going to produce it, and we get to go buy it from them. Now, these prices continue to go. There's generally a 4 to 6 week lag in the price of oil and the price of gas in most cases. So you can expect the price of gas now, you're going to wake up one morning and be another 10 cents and another 12 cents or another 15 cents. And it's going to continue to go up just like it did during the Obama administration. This is already built in right now. Now, these are facts. Doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is what's happening to the nation. And it's going to affect your pocket. By the way, oil affects everything. So your food's going to go up, clothes goes up. Every supply that uses oil base to make things and do things, which is everything, is going to go up. Now, let's take a look at this. This is the U.S. debt clock. We've been covering segments of this debt clock the last 2-3 months going through this. Now, you can't see it all, but let me show you. I just wanted to show you on the chart when you're looking at it right here. This is the section that I'm going to blow up. So what am I looking at here? I'm looking at what's called unfunded liabilities. What does that mean for the United States? That means the amount of debt that the United States has agreed that they're going to take on and pay out eventually. Somewhere down the road, we're going to pay it out. I want to show you something that's unsustainable. Everybody wants to have the new world sustainable development. Well, this can't be developed. There's no way to sustain what's going on here. In 2017, the unfunded liabilities, let me show you where that's at, right there, was $104 trillion. That means if we look at the current debt, we look at future debt, we look at everything we've agreed that we're going to be paying for that keeps going out every year that we borrow money for, $104 trillion. That's long-term debt, right, that we haven't paid for yet. Now, 1 year later, All right, 1 year later, same time, unfunded liabilities was $111,000. That means in 1 year, that not only did the national debt increase, but also the unfunded debt that you don't see, no one talks about. That means when they say we're going to pass all these bills, we're giving all this stuff out. By the way, did you see the new bill? What's in it that's coming out? And all the money's going to all these other nations? This is unbelievable. We'll talk about that in the next week or two. I wanted to pull out some more. They actually got an audio of someone who actually went through 1,000 of the 5,000 pages of what they're still trying to give out. And you can't make up what's in there. It's just unbelievable. And that only adds to this. So how do you keep giving it out? Well, we just print the money and we put it out there, and we're going to pay for it sooner or later. That goes right here, unfunded liabilities. What I actually use this year, that's what goes into that other debt over here, the national debt that we run like $3 or $4 trillion in negative debt last year. So you see, you got all these little baskets where they hide money that you don't see now. But now let's take a look at this one. This was in 2021. This just passed. 2021, same time of the day, same day of the month, same day of this year. Unfunded liabilities now went to $158 trillion. That means in 4 years, the United States had added, not just to the growing debt that he's paying out every year, to future debt, $53.9 trillion. You can't even think that way. I mean, how do you imagine that? One thing you need to understand, even if this nation ignores it, and the news ignores it, the other nations around the world don't. A lot of that debt is going to them, and they know they'll never be paid. It's going to reach the point when the rest of the world says, we need to cut this nation off. There's no longer, it's like you have an uncle or an aunt or somebody that just every time you see them, you know, hi, how you doing today? They get their hand out. Well, that's what it's going to be for the United States. But as soon as they position themselves that they no longer need the dollar, and that's coming pretty soon, then they'll cut the nation off. When they cut this nation off, then you're going to see a fall that you will not believe will happen to this nation and how fast it will come. But that's where all this is headed to. And you need to affix that in your mind, and eventually that's where it's come, to be ready for it so that you don't be like some of the people in 1929 begin to jump out of buildings. Because that's what is coming. So if you haven't done it yet, and we've been preaching this for years, you need to begin today. Get on a regimented plan to pay off your debt. If there's a way to become efficient, well, you don't need to be on the grid. I don't know how to do that. We're trying to find a way to do that right now. Some people can, but how do you do that on a larger scale? You know, to find a way to be able to exist. Because it doesn't take, except like we're looking at a freeze right now. In a matter of a few days, the grocery stores they're empty. There's no trucks bringing food into Dallas right now. So things are pretty much shut down. What happens to the nation when that happens across the whole nation? How fast will this nation deteriorate when people become hungry? That's what we're looking at right now, down the road. You're beginning to see, God's given us the vision of what's coming, and you need to be prepared for that. So we'll talk more about that. I mean, I hate to go down these paths, and I haven't for the last few years because things were fairly stable. But now they have turned quickly, and we're back into that deteriorating zone. But we never did take our foot off the pedal of saying, pay off your debt, get out of debt. So at least you have a home. Next thing to do is store what you can begin to store. Now, I got to be honest with you, I'm not a prepper. So I haven't spent a lot of time in those areas right now, but we will begin to look at it because even God shows us the warning with Joseph. Before the famine came, he said, prepare for 7 years. So they built for 7 years to prepare for the 7 years of lean. That is an example that God wouldn't give us that example had he not warned us that you need to get yourself prepared. Now, sitting back and say, well, God will take care of me, well, that's pretty lazy. You're putting everything on God, and God's going to do his part, but he tells us that we must do our part also. And in this, we need to begin to look at how do we begin to prepare for the tough times in the lean years that are coming. While we have some time, we need to begin to look at it, and you need to do your part for you and for your family and for your loved ones. take care of them, prepare for them, get out of debt, and be ready to be able to go hunker down, like they say, before a hurricane gets here, be able to be hunker down and get ready for the storm that is eventually going to come on this nation and around the world. And it's going to come. Make no mistake. All right, let's move on now. Growing waves of pressure adding to the world's problems. This great reset is not going to help the world. It's actually going to hurt the world in the long run. The conditions around the world are heating up. This is a rare picture. See these two aircraft carriers? This is from two strike force groups that are on China's doorstep right now. Over the past few months since the election, China has been flexing its muscles again in the South China Sea. And they're running everybody out and saying they own that territory. Well, the United States has two aircraft carrier strike force groups over there right now to protect the waterways. The Theodore Roosevelt and the Nimitz carrier strike groups in the South China Sea. This was a shot on February 9, 2021. This is just letting the rest of the world know that we haven't taken our hands off the protection in certain areas of the world. Both of the aircraft carrier groups come with their own full complement of carrier-borne aircraft, and each carrier strike group consists of several supporting warships. So they're self-supporting out there. So if something happens and a war breaks out, they don't send an aircraft from the United States. They're right there on those aircraft carriers. So that's what we're looking at over there. And the Rear Admiral Jim Kurt, who is the commander of the Nimitz Group, says that we are committed to ensuring the lawful use of the sea that all nations enjoy under international law. So he's saying, listen, this is free and open, and everyone has a right, and we're here to make sure everyone maintains that right. Consider the rest of the world where the United States is gone and no longer flexes its muscles to protect the countries like China and North Korea and some of the others who simply want to terrorize the rest of the world. All right, going on. Now, if you remember, I brought this out here on purpose. This here is the leading slide that I use for Roaring Seas, the sermon, like sea and waves roaring from the scripture of Luke 21:25. We had this series 2-3 years ago now, and we talked about how things around the world would heat up like waves. And the Bible showed us, according to the scripture, how that works. So after nearly 4 years of relative stability and peace, tensions threaten of war around the world again. Like a storm approaching. All right, the waves of tension are rising again. You ever watch a storm as it begins to get closer? Well, the waves pick up, the winds pick up and the waves get bigger and bigger and closer. Well, that's what goes on around the world. So some of the countries now are beginning to heat up like a storm. This is just I put down here just some quick headlines of certain countries that are in the headlines right now. Myanmar, Haiti, Hong Kong, Ethiopia, Russia, Yemen, Syria, Iran, even rumors of war in Taiwan and North Korea again. All of these things are beginning to heat up, and there's no way to stop all this stuff with the way we're going in the United States right now. From the sermon, we talked about how the Bible clearly defined the way things were going to happen. The word waves, this is come directly from the sermon. The waves comes from Strong's 2249. It's a root word meaning to be pregnant. Now, when I saw that, I laughed. I said, it's an unusual root word for what we're talking about, to be pregnant. But when you understand the root of where it's coming from, it means to swell. It's like a woman in travail, and that God actually uses the warning in the Old Testament for a modern-day Israel at the time of Jacob's trouble, like a woman in travail. And how does that happen with a woman who's delivering a baby? Well, it swells and she swells and she swells till the baby's full grown in the womb and ready to be delivered. And then when the time comes, she has the period that we go pain, and then the pain picks up. And it gets bigger and more intense and closer. And that's the way it is, like with waves. And that's what God's warning us, is like sea and waves roaring, all right? So it suggests the waves continuing uninterrupted sessions, a growing in intensity, like leading up to a storm or a hurricane. And finally, just everything just pushes on shore and washes everything away through the surge. Well, that's the way God says the world conditions are going to happen. You're going to get warnings, and you're going to see these warning signs. All right, so it gets more intense and bigger. So we're moving back after 4 years of relative calm. All right, now we're beginning to see the calm period leaving, and you're seeing the pressures beginning to build up around the world. All right, the next word into it, waves roaring. So when you see these things happening, that comes from another word pronounced ekio, which means to make a loud noise. It comes from the same word that's used in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, if I have not charity, I become a sounding brass. The word sounding is the same word that is translated roaring in other places in the Bible. It just means it's going to be so loud, it's going to be almost like a confused sound. That's where the root word comes from. A confused, very loud sound. And around the world, these things are going to be, it's like it'll be so blaring that people are going to say, well, I don't want to hear anymore. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So God warns us in that verse in Luke 21, verse 25, that that's the way things are going to happen. Acts 2:2 says, and suddenly there came a sound from heaven like a rushing mighty wind. The word sound is also coming from the same word. So God says things are going to happen. They're going to be loud. It's going to be confusing. But they're going to intensify like a woman getting ready to have a baby as she goes through her labor pains. And they get bigger and closer. And so eventually, until there's birth. And that's the way God talks about preceding the return of Jesus Christ. All right, so now let's take all that information that we said back there and let's add something to it. I want to show you something here. This is the first time I'm showing this to you because I think we're moving into this period now. This is a period that I call pre-war normalization of America. So now we're moving into that period now, and we want to begin to add the second seal to see if it doesn't look like we're moving into this period, right? And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast come and say, see, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that he should take peace from the earth. Did you ever notice it that way before? I never really noticed it that way before. Maybe you did. But I'm telling you, when I read it this time, it struck a chord because what I'm looking at around the world is we had 4 years of relative calm and peace. All those nations that threatened war through the administration of Trump, whether you like him or not, because of his strength and his, just like he did with Ronald Reagan, because of their strength out there and threatening that we're not playing, he told them, you do this, we're coming after you. They stopped. Pretty much most of them, they had some rhetoric, but their actions stopped because they knew they can just wait a couple years and they won't have to fight that administration. So now what we're looking at, and you watch it now, is that peace is going to be taken from the earth. That means that we're leading into the next phase of the 4 seals. Think about that. Can I guarantee that? No. But what I'm looking at, it appears, and I'm telling you this for the first time today, it appears we have moved into this period of time that takes place before the next phase of it, that is this, that they should kill one another. You watch now over the next couple of years, if we don't watch the pressure build up as peace deteriorates and you find more death coming. ISIS is already threatening. The UN is already warning that there's still 10,000 ISIS fighters that are out there who have simply been waiting for, they needed to be funded. They couldn't get the funding through the last administration. But now the United States is reversing everything they did, putting all the money back into the Middle East the way it was, which will funnel it back to the terrorist groups, and you will begin to see it rise up again. I don't understand how the world can be so ignorant to see that this is not happening right in front of their very eyes. But that's what's taking place. And here, God says this is the way it's going to happen. I believe in the next couple of years we're going to come back to this message right now and say that is exactly what happened. I believe that with my whole heart. All right, let's keep going. And that they should kill one another. That is what's coming down the road. All right, let's move on now before I use up all my time here. Seasons. All right, let's go through these seasons. Remember last week, if you watched our program, we left you with a few questions. We didn't answer the questions. So come back next week, we'll get into those. So now let's get into this. It was in God's holy days or Satan's holidays. The pagan holidays versus God's holy days. All right, let's get into this. Pagan holidays leading into God's holy days. All righty. Candlemas Day, February 2nd, every year. We were sitting around, as I mentioned last week, discussing what our next program would be about. And Clayton brought this up, one of our teams here and co-minister with me here in New Orleans. And we were looking through the calendar, and he said, well, you got Candlemas Day. And I'm like, what's Candlemas? Well, I didn't realize it, but it's actually a perversion of a principle that God laid out in the Old Testament. And it comes from here, Leviticus 12, 1 through 4. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that if a woman has conceived and born a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days according to the days of the separation of her infirmity. She shall be unclean. And the 8th day she shall take the flesh of his foreskin to be circumcised. Right? So that's what they're looking at, where the principle actually begins. Right? So we're not yet to the Candlemas Day, but we're working to it. Then she should continue in the blood of her purifying 3 and 30 days, and she shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. All right, so in those 33 days. So what Candlemas Day was is because of the perversion that Christ was born December 25th. Applying this principle 33 days out brings you to every year, February 2nd. So that was the day they declared as Candlemas Day. It was a perversion of the purification process of a person or Christ who was delivered on December 25th. That was the beginning. It eventually morphed into, believe it or not, Groundhog Day. You need to go watch last week. I don't have time to go into all of that. But anyway, that's where it morphs into. So what was hidden? And so we're talking about what was hidden. So when the days of her purifying are fulfilled for a son or for a daughter, again, we're still in Leviticus, she shall bring a lamb of the first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a sin offering to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation of the priest. Now, verse 8. And if she's not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and 1 burnt offering, and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for her, and she shall be clean. All right, so now, God provided that if she couldn't afford to bring a lamb, then she could simply use, instead of a single dove or a pigeon and a lamb, then she would use 2 doves or 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, 1 for the sin and 1 for the burnt offering. By the way, a burnt offering is a free will offering, something that you choose to do on your own. So that was the context, and this is important. This is the context of where all that stuff came from. So how does it apply for what we're talking about today? In the book of Luke, the Bible says that Mary and Joseph brought pigeons or turtle doves that were required, but it makes no mention of bringing a lamb, which I found was quite interesting. Could they not afford a lamb? Quite interesting when you think about this. So let's take a look at that in Luke chapter 2. When the 8 days were accomplished for the circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, and which was so named of the angel which was conceived in the womb, when he was conceived in the womb. And when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, the 33 days, which brought, they thought, to February 2nd, this is where all that came from, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it was written in the law, every male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said of the law, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. All right, so now, this is in plural. See, that's very important. See, they wrote that in plural. So that implied because they didn't bring a lamb, and there's no lamb mentioned here, and it is plural, it shows what we read back in Leviticus. If you didn't bring a lamb, you had to bring 2 of each. And so they're showing that they were bringing 2 of each. It doesn't mention which one. So the question was, here, the pair of turtle doves are 2 young pigeons. So here's the question we left you with last week. Why did they bring the turtle doves or pigeons? The Bible makes no mention of a lamb, only the turtle doves or pigeons, which means plural. They had the financial ability to bring the lamb. They could have afforded to do that because we know that the wise man had just brought them some days earlier, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Or did they? It could have been 2 years later. Could they not have had the funds to buy a lamb? Because you see, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, when they brought to him, it wasn't in the manger when they got there. They were in a house. So this can't be applied as some people try to apply. So what was the difference? Jesus was the lamb. They couldn't bring a lamb to sacrifice because he was the lamb that they brought who was going to be sacrificed 33 years later. The 33 days of the purification was the 33 years of his life. This is powerful information of what God has hidden that the world and Satan has obscured. This is absolutely amazing what God has done here. Jesus was the Lamb. But to be correct in the Scripture, since they couldn't crucify the Lamb then, they had to bring the pair because they offered no lamb. They couldn't offer the Lamb. He was the Lamb. That lamb was going to be offered through God himself, the Father. So, and very, very important. Take this little segment out. If you know someone in the church, play this to them, because I don't know if they've ever heard that before. All right, let's go on now. We're going to pick up the story again when we come back. All right, we're going to go back into the pagan holidays or God's holy days, and we're going to take all the time showing you how Satan has wrapped his pagan holidays around God's holy days to obscure them all. Let's take a break right now and take a look at this video called Hope. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. All right, let's get into the second part of our program on God's holy days or pagan holidays. I'm going to show you an incredible counterfeit. I mean, God, God is wise. Satan's pretty wise too, how he hides everything. He was one of the most brilliant beings that God ever created, who perverted the truth. And now he's perverting it for the whole world. So let's take a look at that, pagan holidays or God's holy days. Remember now, last week we went off with a question. From what scripture does the misapplied principle of biblical truth of Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, come from? All right, so we left you with that question and had a little jeopardy going on here. So let's talk about that today. Let's take a look and see if we can answer the question. From what scripture does Mardi Gras misrepresent in biblical truth? Romans 5, 17 through 21. Did you get it? All right, let's take a look and show you what we're talking about here. For if by one man's death reigned by one man's offense, death reigned by one, much more they that receive abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness shall they reign of life by one, Jesus Christ. Therefore, as the offensive of one judgment came upon all men to condemnation, even so the righteousness of one, the free gift, came unto all men unto justification of life. For by one man's disobedience many were made sinners. So by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous. Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounds, grace did much more abound. That as sin reigns unto death, even so might grace reign through the righteousness unto eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So in this, which is all true, the world has taken this and misrepresented what is said here. Primarily the verses here in 20 and 21. So what are we looking at here? By sinning more is what the world teaches. By sinning more, grace abounds more. The more you sin, the greater the glory of God's mercy and forgiveness. Do you get that? If we sin more, God is magnified in his glory and raises himself even greater in his forgiveness. So the point is, well, then let's just sin more. Then the more we sin, the greater God is. That's the theory behind Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras builds in its sin and revelry all the way till Fat Tuesday. That's exactly what is being done. So in Mardi Gras, mankind's sin increased greater each day until Fat Tuesday, where ultimately God is magnified in his mercy by forgiving the greatest of man's sins. The more you sin, the more God is glorified. So let's sin more, so make God greater. That's what they do. And they actually take the very worst person. That's where back in the original days, they would find the worst sinner and make him rule of that day. He would be the guy who would rule over. They called it Topsy-Turvy Day. We'll talk about that next week as we come back into it. Topsy-Turvy Day, when everything is turned upside down. In fact, isn't that what the world is doing today? It's taking everything that God says and turning it upside down. That which is good is now bad. That which is bad is now good. Turn the whole thing around, upside down for what's going on. That's what we're looking at today, is a magnification of the concept of the time of Mardi Gras, saying that God is greater by the more that we sinned. All right, so one more. All right, let's do this one more here. The category we had last week, we left you with a Jeopardy question. This popular holiday is deeply rooted in paganism and follows Valentine's Day and connects the anchors of modern Christianity to the two most sacred days of the year. What was the answer? It's Mardi Gras. Most people have no idea that it is Mardi Gras that connects the time between Christmas and Easter. It is the anchor. It locks everything in place to where it's supposed to be. And in fact, whether you realize it or not, you cannot determine the time of Mardi Gras until you determine the time of Easter. So you begin your count from the supposed birth of Christ to the 12th night. The 12th night is supposedly when the wise men reach Christ. It goes all the way through to 33 days total. It brings you to February 2nd. But from that time on, you have no way to count forward. It leaves you completely open. So you actually have to go to Easter in the way that they calculate Easter, which is not even close to calculating in Christmas. Pick the day that they choose, lock it into a Sunday, and then you begin counting back ways the 40 days for Lent, which is not 40 days, it's at least 47 days, which is a perversion of God's 50 days of Pentecost going forward. So the whole thing is completely obscured, wrapped around this pagan custom of Mardi Gras, We're going to pick this story up again next week because I don't have time to go into it today because I had too much to cover in the first half of the program. So make sure you tune in to next week when we go into the actual timing, the calendar, the days, and how it all lays out. And we bring you that video on Topsy Turvy Day for next week in Mardi Gras. All right, so make sure now you come back next week because I got a lot to cover. In fact, looking at how much information we have, it might even take 2 more weeks, which is going to bring us right to the holy days. So the timing looks like it's going to be perfect for that this week. All right, now let's see. From our home office this week, this went out in the mail last week, Enduring Faith by Steve Counsel. Be sure to get that sermon and the sermon that we offered in last month's mail out, The Breach of America's Walls. 2 really, really valuable sermons. We also put in the mail The Good German, talking about what's going on as we offer the pre-war normalization of America. Oh, by the way, I'm doing that. I got a slide on it, but I'm doing that this Saturday. And hopefully you can tune in, and I don't have any idea if we're going to be able to live stream. Cox Cable, I'm trying to look at the news and through my web thing at home last night. And because of the cold and the power outages around, it was buffering in and out. But one thing I would like you to know, that if it doesn't live stream like we hoped it will, which we hope it will by that time, is that Jeff goes right home and he begins working on the editing that needs to be done, and he puts it online. So sometime Saturday afternoon, evening, or night, it's going to be out there that you can catch it. So you don't have to wait. But by all means, send for it so you can share this with others. All right, so this Sabbath, the conclusion of the pre-war normalization of America. I'm going to bring out some really important information in this final segment. Because you see, as I mentioned, some of what today is going on, things are heating up, and things are beginning to look really bad. And God has showed us through pre-war World War II in Germany and in Europe and what was going on over there, that those who paid attention in advance, and they were prepared, and they left, got out of what was going on in Germany. And you might say, well, how do we get out of America? God doesn't say get out of America. He says, come out of her, my people. That means you come out spiritually. You put your faith and your trust and your life in the hands of Jesus Christ. And he says he will care for you and protect you. He knows, and that protection might not be all physical. Some of it might be spiritual. But in other words, he will protect you going forward. So we'll talk about that in this conclusion going forward. All right, that's it for our program today. Well, Audrey has outdone herself with this video. Every week, Audrey spends a lot of time trying to find videos for us to bring to this program, and she has got a great one for you today. It's going to bring back some old memories. So you ready? Let's play this one, the COVID mask.
Calling all cars. Calling all cars. Man trying to enter an office building on 4th and Main with no mask. Repeat, no mask.
I walked into my job late last week when my co-workers all began to freak. They started cursing and began to shout and said quite rudely as the boss threw me out,
"You need a mask.
I need a COVID mask.
A COVID mask.
It seemed a lot to ask.
To wear a mask.
To do a simple task.
Put on a mask.
I need a COVID mask. Made it mandatory almost every place that we can't be seen unless we hide our face. I can't even leave my humble abode without something covering my mouth and nose.
We need a mask.
We need a COVID mask.
A COVID mask.
It seems a lot to ask.
To wear a mask.
Can't even mow my grass
Without a mask.
without a COVID mask. This mask wearing isn't fun, and the snitching has now begun. My neighbor called the hotline 'cause my dog wasn't wearing one. Walking through the mall, a woman's voice did ring. Seemed she was troubled by just one thing. She pointed to the door, shook her fist and said,
"What are you trying to do, you jerk? Make everybody sick?"
Forgot his mask.
forgot my COVID mask.
His COVID mask.
Nobody gets a
That
pass.
stupid mask.
Can't even pump my gas
Without a mask.
without a COVID mask.
Honey,
I'm home.
What do you want?
I need to come in and get my mask.
Don't let Daddy in the house, Mommy. He's not wearing his mask.
No mask, no entry. Sorry.
But honey,
You should have taken it with you. You're not getting in this house. I changed the locks.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that little uplifting video on your COVID mask. Next time you're aggravated and wearing your mask, just think about the COVID mask. Well, that's it for our program. I hope you enjoyed that. So next time you're aggravated with wearing that COVID mask, think about that song, the COVID mask. Maybe brighten up your day just a little bit. All right, as we continue to pray for everybody who's suffering through the winter, and remember, if you don't have anywhere to go tomorrow, you're locked in, tune in. God willing, we can get our program out and be able to watch part 3 of pre-war normalization. Spend it with us right here on with God's people for the Church of God Ministries International. I keep wanting to say God's Unchanging Word because that's what we're doing today. But it's our church who presents the sermons every Sabbath live as we live stream right here. All right, have a great week. And remember, share this with everyone you know. They're going to love you for it. Or not. But next week, God